The Vietnam War was one of the most brutal and controversial conflicts of the 20th century. It was a war fought in jungles, villages, and swamps, where the enemy could strike from anywhere and where the line between safe and dangerous was almost invisible. Technology played a massive role in the conflict, and one of the most recognizable symbols of Vietnam is the helicopter. These machines were the lifeline of American forces. They carried troops into battle, evacuated the wounded, and supplied remote outposts. But every helicopter that flew into combat carried a position that became one of the most dangerous jobs of the entire war. This was the door gunner. At first glance, being a door gunner might seem simple. Mounted on the side of the helicopter was a powerful machine gun, usually an M60, capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. The gunner stood or crouched near the open side door of the helicopter, scanning the ground below for enemy movement and providing covering fire when troops were dropped into or pulled out of hot zones. The idea was that the door gunner would protect the vulnerable helicopter from ambushes as it hovered or landed. But in reality, this position quickly gained a reputation for being one of the shortest-lived roles in Vietnam. The dark truth is that door gunners did not survive very long. The casualty rate was horrifyingly high, and many new gunners barely lasted a month before being killed or severely wounded. Why was this the case? The reasons are both tactical and psychological, and together they paint a chilling picture of why so many young men never came home from this role. One of the most obvious reasons was exposure. Unlike pilots who were protected by some armor plating and the helicopter frame, the door gunner was almost completely exposed to enemy fire. Standing or kneeling at the open side door, they had nothing but a machine gun in front of them and thin air around them. The enemy in Vietnam was skilled in ambushes. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops would wait in hidden positions with rifles, machine guns, and even rocket-propelled grenades. The moment a helicopter came into range, the door gunner was the first visible target. To an enemy soldier aiming from the ground, the gunner silhouetted in the doorway was an obvious and easy shot. Helicopters themselves were not designed to withstand heavy fire. They were fast, they could maneuver, and they could land where planes could not, but they were also fragile. The thin metal skin of a UH-1 Huey could be pierced by simple rifle rounds, and the sound of bullets ripping through the fuselage was common. Door gunners had almost no protection in these situations. Even a small burst of enemy gunfire could cut them down. The job was essentially to stand in the open, daring the enemy to shoot. Another dark reason why survival rates were so low had to do with training. Many door gunners were not trained infantry or seasoned machine gunners. Some were mechanics, cooks, or clerks who were assigned to helicopters and given the job because manpower was short. They were handed an M60, taught the basics of loading and firing, and then sent into combat. Without deep combat experience, these young men often froze under fire or made themselves more vulnerable by exposing too much of their body while trying to aim. Their lack of advanced training made them even more likely to become casualties. But even for experienced gunners, the odds were grim. The tactics of the enemy played a major role. Viet Cong fighters were experts in concealment. They knew where helicopters would land, and they prepared ambushes along those flight paths. They also knew that by eliminating the door gunners, they could increase their chances of shooting down the entire helicopter. As soon as helicopters approached, snipers and machine gunners would concentrate their fire on the exposed positions. In the chaos of an ambush, door gunners rarely had the advantage. They were reacting rather than anticipating, and the jungle made it nearly impossible to spot threats in time. Now let me ask you something. Imagine being 19 years old, standing in the open doorway of a helicopter, the jungle whipping past you, knowing that at any second a sniper could put a bullet through your chest. That was the daily reality for door gunners in Vietnam. The psychological toll was immense. Many gunners lived in constant fear, and with good reason. Some veterans recalled how new gunners were often told bluntly that their life expectancy was about 2 weeks. This kind of grim statement was not just dark humor, it was based on reality. Helicopters were constantly flying into hot zones, and few missions ended without shots being fired. For the gunner, every mission felt like rolling the dice with fate. Even when they did survive, the trauma was devastating. Watching helicopters crash, seeing fellow gunners killed, and firing thousands of rounds into the jungle without knowing who you were hitting left deep scars on the mind. For many door gunners, surviving the war did not mean escaping it. Nightmares, guilt, and post-traumatic stress followed them for the rest of their lives. There was also another factor that made the position deadly: the equipment itself. The M60 machine gun was powerful but heavy and sometimes jammed under stress. A jam in the middle of an ambush could mean death. Gunners had to carry belts of ammunition, which added to their weight and made them even less mobile. Some helicopters tried to mount armor shields to protect gunners, but these were limited and often reduced visibility, making it harder to spot threats. In the end, the gunner remained a target with little protection. The tactics of helicopter warfare also contributed to the danger. The American strategy relied heavily on air mobility. Troops were moved quickly by helicopter into areas where the enemy was believed to be hiding. But this meant helicopters were constantly landing in areas chosen by the enemy. As soon as they approached, gunfire erupted. Door gunners were forced to spray the jungle with bullets to suppress the enemy, but suppression fire often drew even more return fire. The helicopter became a magnet for bullets, and the gunner was right in the middle of it. Stories from veterans paint a haunting picture. Many described how new gunners rarely lasted long. One soldier recalled how the first man assigned to the door gun was killed on his very first mission. Another remembered how replacements would arrive, bright-eyed and nervous, only to be gone within weeks. The turnover was so high that some units stopped even trying to learn the names of new gunners until they had survived at least a month. There is also the reality that door gunners were not just fighting for themselves. They had the responsibility of protecting everyone on board. If a gunner failed, the entire helicopter could go down. This sense of pressure pushed many to take even greater risks, leaning out further, exposing themselves more and firing longer bursts. It was courage, but it was also a death sentence in many cases. In some ways, the position of door gunner became a symbol of the Vietnam War itself. It represented courage, sacrifice, and determination, but also futility, vulnerability, and tragedy. The image of a young man gripping an M60, hair whipped by the rotor wash, eyes scanning the jungle below, has become iconic. But behind that image lies the truth: many of those men never came home. The legacy of the door gunner continues today in the stories told by veterans. Some speak with pride of the role they played, knowing they provided cover for their comrades and saved lives. Others speak with sorrow, remembering how many young men died quickly and brutally. Museums and memorials sometimes feature the mounted M60s and photographs of gunners in action, reminding us of the price they paid. When we think of the Vietnam War, we often think of the helicopters. The whir of the rotors, the sight of Hueys flying low over the jungle, became the soundtrack of the conflict. But those helicopters were not just machines. They were lifelines, and the door gunners were the ones who kept those lifelines alive, even at the cost of their own survival. So the dark reason door gunners did not survive Vietnam is this: they were placed in the most exposed, most targeted, and most vulnerable position in the war. They faced constant ambushes, lacked protection, and carried the burden of defending not only themselves but the entire helicopter. Their courage was immense, but the odds were stacked against them from the very start. Vietnam door gunners is not just about the war. It is about young men who climbed into helicopters day after day, knowing the odds were against them, but going anyway. Their courage came with a cost, and too many of them never made it home. Remembering their sacrifice means facing the hard truth of what they endured and honoring the bravery it took just to do their job. If you want more of these untold stories from history and warfare, stick around and subscribe. This is Iron Front, and until next time, take care and keep their memory alive.